I never wanted to believe in the stories. People vanishing into thin air, strange voices calling from the depths of the jungle, eerie whispers among the trees. But now, standing here, alone in the darkness, I realized the stories were never just stories. They were warnings. I was never one to believe in superstitions. I grew up in the city, surrounded by concrete and noise, where the biggest danger was crossing the street at the wrong time. The idea of a forest that could swallow people whole sounded ridiculous. The Amazon was just a jungle, nothing more. That's what I told myself until I found myself lost, terrified, and completely alone. It all started when I joined a small research expedition to explore an untouched region of the Amazon rainforest. The team was small: Dr. Veter, an experienced biologist obsessed with discovering new plant species; Mariana, his assistant, who documented everything with her camera; Andre, a wildlife photographer who had traveled the world capturing dangerous animals; and Elias, our guide. Elias wasn't just any guide. He was born in the Amazon. He knew every plant, every animal, every hidden danger that outsiders would never understand. He also knew the stories. The first night in the jungle was overwhelming. The heat was suffocating. The air was thick, heavy, almost alive. My skin was constantly damp with sweat, and the scent of wet earth, rotting leaves, and distant water filled my lungs. At night, the jungle didn't quiet down. It got louder. Crickets, distant howls, the rustling of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. Every sound felt amplified, echoing through the trees like whispers in the dark. But then there was something else. At first, I thought I was imagining it, a low hum, almost like the wind passing through the trees. But the air was still. There was no breeze. The hum turned into a whisper, faint, indistinct, like a voice calling from deep within the trees. I turned to Elias. He was pale, eyes wide. His hands gripped his machete so tightly his knuckles were white. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Elias didn't answer. He just stood up. He turned away from the campfire, staring into the darkness beyond our tents. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. And then, without another word, he walked away. "Elias!" I called, my voice cutting through the jungle noises. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after him, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The beam of light bounced off the thick trees, casting long, dancing shadows that made my pulse quicken. He had walked into the jungle without his backpack. No water, no supplies, nothing. Something was very wrong. I followed his footprints for several minutes, my breathing heavy, the jungle pressing in around me like a living thing. Every few steps I would hear it again, the whispering. It was closer now. No, not closer. Everywhere. I stopped, shining my flashlight around. Trees, leaves, the endless tangle of vines and darkness. Then movement. A shadow, just at the edge of the light. I turned sharply. Nothing. I was about to call for Elias again when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His footprint stopped, right there in the damp soil, as if he had simply vanished. No signs of a struggle, no drag marks, just empty ground where he should have been. That was when I realized I was alone, utterly, completely alone. I turned back toward the camp, my heart hammering against my ribs. But then I heard it, not the whispers, a voice. "Help me." It was Elias. His voice was coming from ahead of me, deeper into the jungle. But that was impossible. He had walked in the other direction. I should have run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back. But I stepped forward. The trees seemed closer now, the jungle more alive than ever. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me, please." I could hear his breathing, labored, weak. I followed the sound, pushing through the thick vines until I reached a clearing. The air was different here, heavier, colder. And then I saw them. Footprints. Not Elias. Hundreds of them. Bare footprints in the soft earth, circling the clearing. Some looked old. Some looked fresh. And in the center of them, nothing. The voice had stopped. Silence. The jungle was listening. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it. Between the trees, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. Not an animal, not Elias, something else. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to camp. I don't remember what happened to Elias. The others said they never heard him leave. They searched for days, but they never found a single trace. No body, no footprints, nothing. I left the jungle soon after. I never went back. But sometimes at night, when the wind is completely still, I still hear it, a whisper, "Help me." I should have listened to the warnings. I should have turned back the moment I saw the abandoned huts, their wooden doors left ajar as if someone had fled in a hurry. But I didn't. I walked into that village and I never should have. I was deep in the Amazon, working on a documentary about lost tribes and forgotten settlements. The expedition had been planned for months, carefully coordinated with local guides who knew the jungle better than anyone. There were 4 of us: Lucas, a historian specializing in ancient civilizations; Fernanda, an archaeologist obsessed with uncovering forgotten cultures; Raphael, our cameraman, always eager to capture the perfect shot; and I, a journalist documenting everything. Our goal was to reach a mysterious village that had been abandoned decades ago. It wasn't on any official maps, and the stories surrounding it were vague at best. Some locals claimed it was cursed. Others said it was simply a forgotten relic of time. We should have never gone looking for it. We walked for hours. The jungle around us felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on us with every step. Another Elias, our local guide, had grown uncharacteristically quiet. Usually he would tell us about the flora and fauna, explaining the dangers of the jungle, but now he just kept walking, gripping his machete tightly. Then the jungle fell silent. I had read about this before, how the Amazon was never truly quiet. The symphony of insects, birds, and distant animals was constant, but here nothing. No wind, no movement, just dead silence. And then we saw it, the village. It was smaller than I expected, just a handful of wooden huts, their roofs partially collapsed, walls covered in vines. There were no signs of struggle, no bones, no scattered belongings. It was as if the people had simply stood up one day and left. And then I noticed the doors. Every single hut had its door wide open, swaying slightly as if someone had just stepped out. Lucas was the first to speak. "This isn't right," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. Fernanda, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "It's just old ruins. People leave villages all the time." But Raphael, he was staring at something. Guys, his voice was barely above a whisper. We turned. There was a hut at the far end of the village. Its door was closed, the only one. I felt it before I even stepped inside. The air was colder near the hut. My skin prickled with something I couldn't explain. Lucas hesitated. "Let's just record from outside." But Raphael, determined as ever, pushed open the door. It was dark. The walls were covered in symbols, hand-carved, deep and uneven. Some looked recent. And then we saw it. In the center of the room was a pile of leaves and sticks arranged in the shape of a body. At first I thought it was a ritualistic offering, some kind of symbolic burial. Then the leaves moved, not from the wind, from something underneath. A sound echoed in the hut, a low, wet breathing. I stepped back. The leaves shifted again. Something was under there. Fernanda gasped, "Let's go. Now." But Raphael raised his camera. "We have to record this." The breathing grew louder, more ragged, and then a hand shot out from the pile. Not a human hand, something else. The fingers were too long, the skin was stretched and gray, as if it had been left in the damp for too long. The hut suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in, and the breathing turned into a low, guttural growl. Lucas was the first to run. Then Fernanda. I was frozen. And then whatever was under the leaves, whatever had been sleeping beneath them, moved. I ran. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the jungle where our camp was. Elias was already packing. "We leave now." His voice was flat. We didn't argue. We didn't speak of what we saw. When we returned to civilization, Raphael refused to look at the footage. He deleted it without even watching. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I remember the sound, the low, wet breathing, and the feeling that whatever was under those leaves was waiting for someone else to open that door.